everybody. You're all very, very welcome to our second roundtable for the Future Minds Research Network. So thank you to everybody who's joining us. Still people coming in, so that's great and good to see everybody. So let me just give you a wee run through of what we're doing today. We're going to start with some introductions to our panel, and then we'll have a little presentation of what Future Minds is all about. So we're here to talk about mental health in young people. We're here to talk about research, what the research priorities are for mental health in young people. Specifically, that was the goal of our Future Minds project, and we've got some experts with us to do that. But we're going to start by telling you about the work that we've been doing and what young people have told us that they want to see. And the work that the consultation that we've done so far led us to two groups of research questions, one around health and mental health services and mental health in general, and the other around education. So today we're talking about the education one, because of course young people spend a lot of their life, a lot of their days at school, so education was naturally going to be one of the issues that came up for us. So we're delighted to welcome you all today to a roundtable on advancing the research priorities for education. So I'll do a wee bit of a round of introductions just to start. So my name is Siobhan O'Neill. I'm a professor at Ulster University, worked there 20 years researching mental health and health in Northern Ireland. And now I'm also interim mental health champion, working with government, advising around factors that influence the mental health of our population, advising what we should be doing to address the mental health issues within our population, and also working with the public and working with service users to find out about the changes that we need and participating in a public debate and discussion about mental health here. So that's my current role. Also today here we have Dr. Rhonda Burns. Rhonda, do you want to give everybody a wave? Rhonda's working with me on the Future Minds project. So all of the work that I'm talking about, it's all Rhonda's work. So she's done all the heavy lifting. So thank you so much for your contribution, Rhonda. It's been brilliant. We've had a really tough year with the pandemic, and Rhonda's done a great job throughout that, taking forward this agenda. So we also have Chris Little, an MLA and chair of the Education Committee. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Siobhan. Good to see you.
Working with the Alliance Party. An MLA for the Alliance Party, so thank you so much. We also today have Kula Yasuma, who is our Children's Commissioner. So hi, Kula. Great to have you along.
I'm very shy. I'm just saying that.
And understated as well, as we've learned something. Yeah. We also have Julie Cameron, who's the Associate Director of Scotland and Northern Ireland for the Mental Health Foundation. Hi, Julie. Do you want to say hello?
Hi, everyone. Nice to see you.
You're coming to us this morning from Scotland, are you? Is that
I am. Sunny Glasgow.
We're all at home at the minute, still. So great to have you here, Julie, and great to be working with the Mental Health Foundation. And now, who's next on my list? Theo Burton, who's the Policy Officer for Pure Mental, young people, really inspirational group of young people who are advocates for mental health and have done a lot of work and are really influencing things. So it's great to see. So hi, Theo, you're very, very welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
Hello. And also we have Mia Baker from the FLARE project, which was run by the Education Authority and the Public Health Agency. Both Theo and Mia are, as you can see, young people themselves. It was great to have you here, and thanks for coming along to help us with all of this. Hi, Mia.
Hi.
So super duper. Okay, so what we're going to do to start is I'm going to do that tricky thing where we share some slides. And I'm going to start by going through what young people have told us through our consultation exercise as part of this Future Minds project. And Rhonda's going to be helping me out here. And then we're going to have a discussion involving our panel members, and we'll ask each of the panel members to give us their views on what they've heard. And that's going to be our running order. Okay, so hopefully I'll be able to share my screen. And right, not actually appearing, so let's try that again. Here we go. Right, so you should have our Grey Future Minds mental health slide in front of you. That is super. So we received money from the MRC and the research councils to undertake this project, and the project was about developing a research network in Northern Ireland to look at issues around young people's mental health. And we wanted to really to set the agenda. So our main focus for this was, in your opinion, whoops, we're way ahead of ourselves. In your opinion, what is the most important question that researchers should be trying to answer about the mental health and well-being of young people in Northern Ireland? So this comes at a really, really important time, because in that mental health strategy draft, there is the commitment there to a mental health research centre to supporting mental health research. And there's been a lot of work in various different fora to establish what the research priorities are, but we've never really asked young people themselves about what research questions they wanted answered. Now, there's been various different engagement exercises undertaken, particularly through the McPinn Foundation and, you know, in other parts of the UK. But we need to recognise that in Northern Ireland, the situation is slightly different. We are coming out of a period of conflict, hopefully coming out of a period of conflict that has impacted our parents. Young people right now, hopefully haven't been too much impacted, but have they? I mean, we don't really know. But their parents and grandparents certainly have experienced a lot of violence, a lot of trauma, and we know that there's a mental health impact of that. So our young people here, their lives are different from the lives of young people in other parts of the UK. I think it's fair to say. So there are different research questions that they will have. Our education system is also different, and I think that's another reason why we need to be asking young people what they think the research questions are, and what are the aspects of our education system that we need to know more about. We need to know about the impact on young people's mental health. So what we did here was we sent out a questionnaire. Rhonda, I say we, it was really Rhonda's work, but we worked together to send out a questionnaire targeting young people in Northern Ireland and asking them about their views about the research priorities. So there was 479 responses, and this was quite an open-ended thing. So we generated over nearly 300, over 200 questions, relevant research questions. So we just got young people to say themselves what they wanted us to study. But whenever we analysed those, there was 12 main areas of concern that young people had around their mental health. You know, and so we were asking about research questions primarily here, but to be honest, these were issues that were affecting young people's mental health that they wanted addressed. They wanted us to learn more about, but they wanted them addressed as well. Very difficult to untangle those sort of issues affecting mental health versus what we should be researching. So there's 12 areas of concern. We also held a series of webinars and focus groups with young people where we talked about these issues and refined those questions. And in our webinars, we took key issues that were affecting young people and got some research experts to come along and give presentations, and we got some young people to come along too and talk about their experiences. And again, the whole orientation of those was to find out what the research issues were. So these 12 issues, these 12 areas that we're talking about today came out of the webinars, the focus groups and the questionnaires. So just to go through what our webinar topics were, they're all available online actually if any of you want to see them. There's some really good, really interesting presentations in there. So the webinars, the first one was around the pandemic and loneliness, and smartphones came up there a lot as well. So we had some really good conversations around those issues. The second webinar, we looked at the prevalence study. So this was the recent study that actually came out, I think, of the Children's Commissioner's Still Waiting report, where they had highlighted the lack of any research data on the levels of mental health problems of young people and the childhood adversities for Northern Ireland. So we had Lisa Bunting there talking about Dr. Buntings from Queen's, talking about the findings from that piece of research. Very, very useful. We also then had a group from Ulster that I'm involved with called the Student Psychological Intervention Trial. We're doing some DNA work and looking at the microbiome of the mouth and all of this sort of thing. So they presented there, and we had young people's groups talking as well, including Pure Mental and Youth Action Northern Ireland. Third one was on physical activity. This was a really, really good one. One of the most memorable, some really powerful messages there. Again, thinking about the impact of the pandemic on physical activity in young people. And now we know so much more about the importance of physical activity for good physical health, for good brain health, for well-being, for emotional regulation. So that was a really important one. The fourth one we did in collaboration with the Northern Ireland Suicide Prevention Research Network that we're launching next Monday, actually, formally. And that was on suicide prevention and self-harm in young people. Again, a really pressing issue that came up a lot in our questions, in our questionnaires, and it's raised at all of our focus groups too. And then the final one was on gender identity and sexual orientation. And again, the figures are showing that in Northern Ireland, that young people who are LGBT plus have higher rates of mental health problems and indeed suicidal behaviours than other young people, and also that this is higher in Northern Ireland compared with other UK regions. So that was a really, really useful webinar as well. So those were our webinars. These are some of the issues that young people raised. So sorry, this flicks on very quickly. Okay, so the key research questions that came out of this exercise, the first one was, how can we ensure that the voices of young people in Northern Ireland are heard? And I'm going to turn to Rhonda, if that's okay, just to ask you, what was it that young people told us about this? Did they feel that their voices were heard? Was this about whether or not they were being listened to? What was beneath this research question?
Yeah, so the young people were telling us that sometimes they don't feel like they're being listened to, they don't feel like they're being heard. And I have to say, I've learned from the young people, they are very, very keen to get involved across the board, and they actually have plenty to say. But they were telling me things like when consultations, for example, with school inspectors were going on, that they feel the information that they were sharing was often not taken into account, not listened to, they didn't see any changes. And they're telling us that sometimes the help that they get is not always the help that they need, that they feel sometimes that the help is what the adults think they need. Over the last couple of weeks, developing up on the conversations as this information is starting to come out, I'm also beginning to wonder now, is it as much that they're not being answered as they're not being heard? So when they go forward with things, they feel like they're being ignored if they don't see any changes, but maybe it's that we can't do something right now. But nobody's gone back to tell the young people that we can't do this, or we might have to wait to do that. And here's the reasons why we might have to wait. We're aware of the issues. So I'm beginning to think there's much deeper concerns within that question than just the young people feeling like they're not being listened to.
Okay, so if you can think of the research studies that you might do around that, would be looking at young people's participation in the, in the panels that are out there and the groups that are out there, which young people are missing from those groups. Because there's a lot of young people's advocacy groups, and we'll hear from them. And we've got two young people today who are really involved. But so I think it's also young people being heard, but also what young people are not being heard. Are there marginalised groups of young people who are not involved, and who they are, and what data do we have? And as we think about a citizens' assembly for young people, or a young people's assembly, I think this is a really important, pertinent issue that we continue to collect data around us. So, okay, so that's something that our panellists could think about. I'm going to give panellists a couple of minutes each just to reflect on this and think before we widen the discussion. So just to give you the heads up about that. The second one was, what can we do to make young people in Northern Ireland feel less isolated, lonely, or marginalised? So it's Loneliness Awareness Week or something this week, and all of the data showing us actually that young people, more young people are feeling lonely than older people. In fact, I know people feeling very, very lonely and isolated, and the pandemic has impacted on that as well. And I think it's appropriate to raise that within the education roundtable as well, because the school system and taking young people out of school has increased that sense of loneliness. So tell us some more about that too, Rhonda.
Yeah, this one was really interesting, because here the young people mentioned how aware they are about minority groups such as LGBT plus young people and BAME youth, how marginalised they are in society, and they're aware of the legacy of discrimination in Northern Ireland and things like that. But within this theme, the young people were also very, very aware that there are individuals who don't necessarily identify with those groups, who are feeling isolated and lonely and marginalised right across their community. And they're asking for help and support for all young people, including those who belong to the minority groups, but also for those who are just in general feeling lonely or isolated or marginalised through their own private lives.
That's a really big one. So what loneliness interventions are there? How are we measuring loneliness, connectedness in young people at the minute? Are we measuring that in schools? What's happening there, and what can we do to improve that? Brilliant. Okay, so this is interesting. Social media, we brought this into the education one again. It's not really an education issue as such, but it is such a huge part of everyone's life, right now, of a lot of our lives, managing social media. And I suppose there seems to be a recognition that social media is here to stay. So how can we build on the positives and reduce the negatives? So yes, it's linked to the loneliness one as well, because social media can help young people particularly connect, and has been a way for young people to connect during the pandemic too, but there's a negative impact as well. So how can we help young people navigate this new world that they find themselves on? What were young people telling you, Rhonda?
Well, I think I would agree with you, Siobhan, there. We have possibly a full generation where online connection may well be their primary way to communicate with each other. So the young people who took part in the consultation, they reported both positive impacts and negative impacts on social media across the board on all platforms. So while they were mentioning the negative impacts on body image and various things like that, they've also been telling us that social media has helped support, in some cases, their mental health over the past year during the pandemic, because it has helped reduce the isolation and loneliness for some people. So it's very much it's like a double-edged sword. It can be a force for good, but equally it can be a source of disinformation, unrealistic illusions, and negative consequences. So it's about that balance, I think.
Aye, and how to support young people who are having difficulties, and make sure that we foster human connections as well. I think face-to-face connections, in addition to all of this, so that there's a balance. Very good. Okay, right. So we've got a framework for mental health and well-being in schools, or emotional well-being and resilience, whatever it's called. But how can mental health literacy, resilience, and coping be integrated across the entire school curriculum, at primary and post-primary? This was a really important one. They wanted mental health in school. So we have a framework for doing this, but what are the best mechanisms? How do we do it? What were young people telling you about mental health in schools, Rhonda?
So I was actually quite not shocked, but quite caught off guard by this one. How many times it had been mentioned that the young people feel that what little information they do receive is very disjointed within sort of their classes and across their lives. And they're asking for the training in coping, the training in resilience, the information to be introduced from the very earliest stages, even at preschool, and for it to be consistent right through the school careers, because they feel it would help them to help themselves, but it would also help them to support their friends and their family when they're struggling as well. So they're asking for the tools to help themselves and help other people.
Yeah, and what was I going to say? Yeah, I think the framework is the start of a journey really for this, you know, and it's about awareness raising and of course, you know, the implementation of the framework and how schools choose to interpret the framework is going to be an issue there as well. Whether, but it's, I think the entire curriculum across all levels, everything is the standout kind of part of this for me. How can we best do that? And what are the impacts of it? How are we measuring whether this has been done, how it's been done, what is the change that it's creating, and what are the potential pitfalls when you try and do this sort of thing? You know, are there any potential harms there as well, and that we need to be monitoring as we embark on this journey? So really useful and relevant. So what is the impact then? Yeah, this is a related one. What is the impact of mental health and wellbeing in young people when a whole school approach is embedded? So does it work? And what is the impact? Yeah, tell us more about that, Rhonda.
So again, this one caught me slightly off guard. To be honest, I wasn't expecting it. But the young people are telling us that some schools and some teachers are very, very good at this. They're there to support them. But there's also some schools and some teachers that are not so good at this. Now, the young people were telling us that they know that in Northern Ireland, they're timetabled to have classes in their secondary level education called Learning for Life and Work. But the young people said that sometimes they feel that this is often just a tick box exercise, something that the schools have to do just to say that they have done it. And for some, they didn't sort of do much in these classes for the first few years at the secondary level. And then for some, it became an academic subject, which was worth half a GCSE. So it really wasn't about developing the children. It was about how they can achieve academically. And for others, they had described it as, oh, that's when we have a free period and we can go off to the library or the common room. So there's almost a feeling among the young people that we're missing a trick here. We're missing where we could use these classes to actually support, inform, and actually make connections with the young people.
Okay, so it's how it's delivered, and then yeah, so it's delivered in different ways. There's a lot of flexibility there, and the outcomes are not always measured. There's, yeah, and it's not always working basically. And then this, whoops, back again, very relevant to the experience of the past year as well. How do we reduce the impact of the stress experienced within the education system for young people in Northern Ireland? It's interesting for me that it is, how do we just reduce the impact of the stress rather than reduce the stress? There's an acknowledgement, I think, there that you know, education is going to be, there's going to be stress there, there's going to be examinations. All of this is necessary at some level, but I think we should also be talking about the level of stress that we're putting on our young people. That would be my view. So what were you hearing here, Rhonda?
So yeah, this was actually the one that came up the most consistently time and time again. It was the most mentioned topic in the consultation, but actually over the focus groups and the other conversations that we've had with young people sort of over the last year, it's been mentioned again and again. And they're relating experiences both to the past year around the issues of COVID and the lockdown, but also experiences prior to the epidemic. So they're telling us that they feel under immense pressure to achieve academically. And they're worried about their future studies. They're worried about their future careers. And many have mentioned even how the grades are being assessed over the recent times, and how they're fearful here that there's a perception that students who are favoured by teachers will receive better grades. And they also fear that the grades that they've been awarded will not reflect the ability that they actually have, because they haven't been able to sit the full exams or complete the full coursework, complete the full courses, whatever they've been doing. But even in recent conversations, when we've asked young people, you know, has there been a time in your life when you felt under severe pressure or that you felt that you weren't coping very well? And almost every single one of them referred back to something that it was school centered, and usually a period of severe exam stress. So that was consistent over young people who were still in secondary education and young people who had actually moved on to university. So it was quite an important topic for them.
Yeah, I mean, every study that's ever been done seems to show that young people get their mental health declines in the run up to exams. Exams are really stressful, and the younger they are, the more stressful it is, and it can impact their mental health. And when you look at even self-harm and suicidal behaviour, it's around exam time that you do get that surge, that increase. So how do we help young people cope? But if there was anything we could do to reduce the stress as well, I think that would be good. Obviously. So yeah, right. So our 3 questions that I want all of us, and I know we're talking about topics, but we also need to think about research on mental health and education. Is the goal of our final report will be about setting research priorities. When I say research, I'm also thinking about data that could be collected and analysed, that's not being collected and analysed. So, you know, trying to influence that agenda, but also think about the topics too, of course. So how can we develop and support research in mental health and education and make sure that data gets collected, that researchers are supported? And how do we ensure that research then influences policy and practice, so that whenever we have data, that can actually influence what ministers decide and what the Department for Education do, I suppose, ultimately. And then how can we ensure that young people have a role in shaping mental health research policy and practice? What initiatives are currently happening? Some really good examples of work through the Children's Commissioner and through the Education Committee and all of that. So how can we ensure that young people have a role there as well, and that their voices are heard, and that the data does influence what we do going forward? So that's really the end of my wee presentation. I'm going to just ask each member of the panel just to reflect on what they've heard, and where they think we should go in relation to these 3 questions, or indeed anything else for the remainder of this. So thank you, and give me a wee minute now to close this off. How do I stop sharing without stopping? I'll just stop the presentation because that will work. Find it. Okay, thank you. Why can I not see my own face here? Oh, I can. There I am. All right. Okay, let's just, in the same order that we did before. So will we start with you, Chris? If you could let us know what you think, and hopefully what the Education Committee can do in terms of data, research and young people's voices influencing policy around mental health in the education system. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Siobhan. Do the best I can here. There's a wide range of issues to try and cover there. I think I'll hone in on, I think it was question number 3 in terms of young people being heard. The Education Committee had a really interesting session with Professor Laura Lundy, the co-director of the Centre for Children's Rights, and some of the key messages that Laura left with us was that, and indeed she has research herself entitled this, that voice is not enough, that it's not just about, and I think this came out in what Rhonda was saying earlier, that it's not enough to just hear and listen to young people, that her model suggests the 4 key concepts of giving young people space, giving them voice, giving them audience, but also giving them influence. So the Education Committee has tried to take engaging with young people really seriously. We've had a number of public assembly sessions with young people from a wide range of organisations, and we've also held engagement events where we've targeted particular young people, and we've got an art project running at the moment as well to try and give children of all ages and backgrounds an opportunity to express their experience of life and learning during lockdown. So I know as well that Professor Lundy's model has been taken up by the Irish government to inform a national children's participation strategy, and that's been used in other international organisations as well. So I think key to research around youth mental health is taking a really robust approach to not just listening, but engaging with young people and ensuring what we hear back from them is put into practice. And some of the key organisations that we would have engaged with is the Elephant in the Room campaign, that has got some really specific recommendations around youth mental health. And personally, I lobbied the health minister to make sure that the young people involved in the Elephant in the Room campaign were listened to, engaged with, and have influence. They attended a meeting of the, you may have been at it, they had attended a meeting of the executive subcommittee on the mental health strategy. So the key now is to make sure that those ideas get implemented. And every time the Department of Education are at the Education Committee, I'm not going to let them off the hook. I'm going to keep asking what specific recommendations from the young people have made their way into the youth emotional health and wellbeing framework that you referred to earlier. And I'd be slightly concerned that lots of those really specific ideas are not quite making their way in there, but we have to work to ensure that they do.
I think, Chris, it's important even just to collect the data on which young people are involved. Is it the same group again and again and again? How do they make sure that young people in rural areas, young people, with different socioeconomic groups, young people who are marginalised and lonely, who don't stick their hand up and come forward for things, that sort of data, I think, is really, really important. And what work has been happening, to really target the young people who might have the dissenting voices, the young people whose voices aren't heard. And we have I'll ask the question later, but children with disabilities, young people with disabilities, how are they included? As an example. So it would be worth just making sure that the data is there, so that whenever we ask these questions of which young people are influencing the framework, for example, that we can get some answers and we can have
Absolutely.
a range of different views.
Okay. Briefly, Siobhan, obviously you referenced the Youth Assembly as well, and I'm delighted that after so many years of people, including Children's Commissioner, working towards that there's a real possibility of a sitting of the Youth Assembly occurring before recess, I'm advised. Kula will be able to advise more on that, but the Education Committee took an informal briefing on that, and it seems like a lot of work has gone into ensuring that those marginalised voices and minority backgrounds are being included in that Youth Assembly. So hopefully that will be one key body for people to engage with to secure.
Yeah, we need to go out and I'll know more about this, but we need to actually go out and find young people who would not normally come forward for all sorts of different reasons. I mean, I think of myself as a young person, even going to university wasn't really something I considered in my whole kind of sphere. And, so you need to really be targeting those young people who don't have the confidence, who wouldn't think that this is for them. So let's just turn to Kula and get her views of what we've heard.
First, thanks for that. First thing, so you said 2 minutes. I swear Chris took 10. So I'm just telling you, I'm going to follow this, and I'm not going to try and be brief. So yes, the Youth Assembly is quite possibly one of the most exciting things that's happened in Youth Voice in Northern Ireland for a very, very long time. And I keep saying this, runs the risk of being the most effective youth parliament, young people's parliament on these islands, if not in Western Europe. The way it's been constructed and the way the young people have been recruited has been very much based on geography, but also Section 75 characteristics, and add a few more, such as social deprivation, being looked after, and young carers. So there was an algorithm involved, I just want to say, and I know we don't like algorithms, but that seems to have ensured participation. So there's a couple of things I want to say. And I just want to caution about language around this notion of marginalised and hard to reach young people. There's no such thing. They're ignored, they're overlooked, and they're not spoken to. But there's very few young people where somebody isn't engaging with them, whether it's schools, those young people who find themselves in adverse situations. There are phenomenal, including in rural areas, phenomenal work being done, particularly by the voluntary and community sector, by churches and a range of NGOs, as well as the state, engaging with those young people. So the question around participation for me, particularly on some of these very thorny issues, is not only how researchers find that voice, but how we skill up our professionals who are there to help young people to sort out their problems, how we embed in the way, in the way the Lundy model proposes, but how we embed the harnessing of those views and of those experiences. Because I am fairly sure that Ben and Mia, I'm putting words in your mouth, which is a very adult thing to do, but I know from having that Theo, and Mia, I was thinking about Ben, and I can see your name right in front of me, will say, you keep asking us the question. The question I have is now let's get on with it. Now let's build the services and include us in the development of the services. Who are the young people that haven't got the services? Well, quite a lot, because we haven't got enough services, but we all know, and I can see it in the chat, children with disability and particularly children with a learning disability, nowhere near enough mental health services and support for them. Children with drugs and alcohol problems, misuse, you can have a drug and alcohol problem, but you can't have a mental health problem at the same time. Well, we know that they're connected, that they're one and the same thing. Nowhere near enough services that are able to address the needs of those children. Children who are in crises, we know there's nowhere near enough services. So there's all of that, and all of that begs the question about early intervention and prevention. And this is where schools and education come into their own, because nearly every child in Northern Ireland is in some form of education setting. They are seen every day. And we need to be able to support our schools to be able to metaphorically, and in some cases literally, wrap their arms around them. And until we give our teachers and our school staff the space, the skills, and the confidence to be able to do that, we all we will do is keep on talking about it. Around about £20 million has gone into improving emotional health and wellbeing in schools this year. £20 million in Northern Ireland. And this is where research, we need to talk to young people and find out what it is they need, which we have done more or less, but we need to keep doing that. And then we need to make sure that what we put into schools responds directly to that, is driven and informed by young people, but also the evidence. We can't have this scattergun approach where everyone's scrabbling, and just because I have a label, mental health and wellbeing professional, that it means I know what I'm doing. I like to think I'm a football pundit, but I don't see Gary Lineker ringing me up. So, because I'm rubbish, and I'm also biased. But so we need to have a quality assurance process and mechanism. So obviously, as you know, I can talk on forever, but in my understated way, I'm going to shut up now.
No, you're absolutely right. We need to know that what we're doing is working. We need outcomes measured, and we need the pre and post. We need another prevalence study as well, because the one we have.
We need we need the benchmark. We need the service standards. We need the outcomes measures, and we need to know. And this is where we really need to hear from young people about what success looks like and what it feels like. And we need to have really robust metrics to be able to do that.
Do we need to, Cole, this is one for you. Do we need league tables of how well schools deliver mental health, or the mental health status, or something like that? It's not that
I'm an Arsenal support, Siobhan. Don't talk to me about league tables. We need, as you know, and thank you for giving me the segue into that. As you know, at the moment we judge our schools, particularly this week, by academic success. That is that judgment and those unofficial league tables is what has led to what was exam stress. Pre-COVID, our kids were up to high dough with exam stress. What I have been advocating, what my office has been advocating, has been a wellbeing measurement, a robust wellbeing measurement. And we know that's possible because we've seen the OECD, some of the Australian stuff, is that we can have a wellbeing measurement, that schools can produce that, and that would be a great way of informing parents and young people and children around how well the school does, both academically, but also on the other things that is a child's right to receive an education, work on their confidence, on their self-esteem, on their resilience, and on their social skills. So we absolutely do need a statutory wellbeing measurement for every school and education setting in Northern Ireland.
Although recognising, Kula, that a lot of schools, just due to the catchment areas, we know there's a deprivation gradient in terms of wellbeing. So it's about measuring the work that schools are doing to improve wellbeing rather than necessarily.
But also making sure that those areas have the additional supports and services in. So what was going on when those children came into the school, and so the wellbeing measurement will be, is everyone happy? But the journey, as you said, the benchmark and stuff. But those schools absolutely need the additional supports and services to make sure that they're able to level up. Because COVID is going to be post-COVID is all about building back fairer. It's definitely what we need. We've discovered what's not fair in our society. It's been laid bare, and we need to learn the lessons from it.
So that's a really good segue into Julie Cameron's piece from the Mental Health Foundation. Really strong response to mental health strategy around inequalities in mental health, and really impressed by the work the Mental Health Foundation are doing in that whole area. So maybe you want to take that up, Julie.
Yeah, so a few things, just a few observations from me, a lot kind of echoing what other people have said. So I guess in terms of that voices question, I absolutely agree with Rhonda and others about that cycle of engagement, and actually that cycle of engagement quite often isn't fulfilled. There's no feedback loop, and that's the real problem. And also from what we can see is that quite often there's a real lack of young people being embedded into accountability structures. So they're consulted, but actually, and I guess it goes back to what Kula said there, that they're not part of the discussion around what success looks like. And I think that is a problem. I guess another couple of things that have kind of arisen for me, one of the ones, and it goes down again, I think it just touches on what Kula was saying, is about what we would describe as community derived outcomes. So what success looks like for you. And I think that's a really, really important question. I think sometimes when we're working within an educational setting, I guess the default measurements that we have are quite clinical measurements that are quite diagnostic based in terms of clinical illness rather than mental health distress or loneliness or isolation. And actually that means that quite often quite a lot of things are being missed, particularly within a whole preventative agenda, which is what we would be really advocating for. So there are problems there, I think, about getting that measurement right. So I absolutely agree that a wellbeing measurement for schools would be great, but I would caution against going down the diagnostic tool. I don't think that's necessarily the space that schools should be getting measured against. Actually, they should be getting measured against something else. So there's something in that, and I guess I would absolutely echo what you touched on there, Siobhan, about where things like wellbeing measures are in place, that moving into league tables. I worry about league tables because of the inequalities that sometimes they don't take account of. And actually the schools that end up doing very poorly in league tables are the schools that have got the biggest challenge, the schools that are dealing with the highest levels of inequality, that are trying their best with limited resources. And actually they will fare worse than others that are able to put resources in and have a now more affluent area that they're perhaps serving. So inequalities has to be, for me, the lens that is looked over everything when you're looking at what needs done within an educational setting. Because unless we do that, then the preventative methodologies that are going to be put in and the interventions that are going to put in are probably only going to speak to that kind of worried well, that group that we look at who tend to kind of step forward first. And that's not to say they don't have needs. They do have needs, but I guess it's probably not capturing those whose needs are the most acute and who are most hidden in some way. So yeah, so I've got other thoughts, but I'm mindful that you're probably going to come back to us for some of the other points and some of the other priorities. But that would be some of my first things, is about the need for this to be looked at through an inequalities lens, and really thinking about the existing structures and where young people's voice can be embedded into accountability, because I think that's what's lacking at the minute.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Thanks, Julie, for that. We have a few questions coming in, so please keep sending in your questions in the Q&A, and we'll have an opportunity to go around all the panel members at least once before this, so everybody will get another chance. So if there's anything you want to say, that's your chance, but we'll go through the questions as well. But thank you, Julie, for that. Do we want to now move to who's next? Theo. Hi, Theo. What would your response to all of these conversations around involving young people, hearing young people's voices, measuring change, measuring mental health outcomes in schools? Any ideas for us?
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack there, but to kind of hone in on the third question, really about engaging young people and getting them involved in the process. Kind of 3 words I'd say, and we really embody this, so we really take this on board in Pure Mental, is schools, places of learning, and youth groups or similar settings. And they are time and time again. I think no matter what school you go into, no matter what youth group go into, you'll see at least some very energized, very engaged young people who you ask them about mental health and their ears prop up and they want to get involved. And this isn't always the most outspoken young people. It's also some of the young people that you have to ask them directly and say, what are your thoughts on this? Not the ones that will go to the front of the queue, but maybe a bit shyer. So our point is there's lots of really engaged and excited young people. And I know we've been talking a bit previously about the internet and social media. And we are in this weird golden age of where young people have access to data and campaigns and policy that they may have in the past couple of decades had to go and read books for, or go down to, you know, libraries and record places. Now they can get involved in campaigns really, really easily. And now they're just crying out, not only to be, as has been mentioned a couple of times, be a voice in that, but also to be accountable in policy creation and accountable in creation of programs to support them. Young people, plain and simple, are stakeholders, and they are arguably the most important stakeholder when we're creating policy for them in schools. And, you know, not to Pure Mental's horn, but we have a couple of programs that really kind of hone in on that organizational aspect to young people. Our Wellbeing Council, which is quite similar to some of the places talked about, is for the young people selected on kind of similar criteria, you know, from all across Northern Ireland, rural settings, different backgrounds. They're incredibly engaged, and they want to, you know, we made sure to make a setting for them. Not only they can give their voice, but they can act on it. You know, they can write letters, they can put in that, make policy plans, action plans, send them off. So really just touching back on what has been said, you know, when it comes to data and research, young people need to be involved the entire way through, not just at the start and then, you know, some of the experts take it away and make a plan for it. They need to be consulted at every stage of it, because you know, I'm 20 and someone who's 15 or 14 probably has far better insight than me on issues like social media, on things like TikTok. I don't have a clue on TikTok, and that says a lot about how quickly the internet is progressing. We really do need to be engaging with them. And the thing is, things move that fast in a young person's life, especially recently with the pandemic, with exams and with, you know, there's P7 placements as of this last week. Things move so fast. They need to be a partner in this process. You know, we can't just start off, consult with them, and then bring out an end result. We need to be engaging with them every step of the way, because things do change and young people's voices are really, really important. And just one other thing I would say is that when we're talking about schools and places of learning, young people generally want to work together on this. We have, and again, sorry to Pure Mental, but we have in-school committees, and those in-school committees are literally groups of young people who just want to band together for better mental health within their schools. And they're also engaged in making plans. You know, I think you kind of dip your toes in the water with mental health. You want to improve your immediate environment, you want to improve it for your peers, and then all of a sudden you want to improve it for everyone. It's kind of like that. It certainly has been for me. But those kind of groups are really important. And when, you know, we are looking at data and when we're looking at research, we need to engage with them, because what we found is those groups, yes, you have some really outspoken young people, But you also have young people who maybe feel they've been underrepresented in those groups, and they've gone to these groups thinking, fantastic, someone will listen to me, someone will take on board what I'm saying and not just view me as underrepresented group. And that's what we're finding. So when we're looking at asking young people and partnering with them, we need to be looking in schools, we need to be looking in youth groups, and we need to be looking in places of learning, including learning at home, including learning in different settings. And yes, so partner with young people is the gist of it.
Completely. Yeah, that's what we need to be doing. Do we need to give young people the vote, Thea? What do you think? 16? Is that a good idea?
That is a whole different can of worms. I think if we're talking about political parties, they need to pay much more attention to young people's mental health. Young people are compassionate activists online, and I think there's a whole lot of, when we speak to political parties a lot, and they will remark at some groups and say, wow, they're really online, far more online than us. Companies as well say this. Young people are skilled hands at using the power of activism online. They're really, really engaged in politics, like really engaged in politics this time around, and political parties shouldn't underestimate it, because now they're demanding things. They're saying, here, there's a line in the sand here, please include things on young people's mental health. We're doing that too. We're meeting with political parties to try and get them to adopt some of these things. But absolutely, political parties should pay attention to them. They're not just an unvoting demographic. They're the voters of the future. And a few years down the line, the 16-year-olds will remember when political parties pay attention to them and work with them, or they don't.
I think that's one of the things we were trying to emphasize at our last meeting with Pure Mental as well, the importance of encouraging young people to participate in democracy and to vote and use their vote, and to really make that argument in addition to everything else that you're doing, but to actually highlight the link between participating in democracy and using your vote and the change that young people are looking for. And it's just so powerful. If you only knew your own power, like, as a young person, it's incredible what you can achieve. So thanks for that. All right, Mia, sorry, you're the last one here, but so looking forward to
yeah. I've just got a couple of points. There's something that Kuna said about young carers and how their stress would be a lot, would be higher than other people's, because I'm in a young carers group called Action for Children, so I can speak on behalf of a lot of them and what they've said to me. There is little to no support for young carers in school, compared to some of the people that I've been with and stuff. I have got it a lot easier. I know people who live with their grandparents, have to take care of them, have to make sure they get their medicine, get up in the morning, and then worry about themselves and going to school and, being late. And then I know a school that you have to sign in the morning and say just like a lower sixth or upper sixth pupil as to why you're late, and they decide whether it's a worthy excuse or not, and then they send you on to another teacher. I think that teachers don't realise as well how much it can affect a student's mental health then on top of schoolwork. And I think schools need to help students find a way to split home life and school life as well, but also then take into consideration that home life does really affect school life. There's been situations where I've come into school the next day still, because I was in my GCSE year during COVID, and things in my household were there was a lot of high tension, and coming into school then, while we weren't in lockdown afterwards, it was really difficult because the school, there was little to no support in that area. And there was obviously the unsure, we weren't sure about obviously what was going to happen with exams anyway, and I just feel like there's little to no support for young carers, or no empathy even. There's no understanding whatsoever of what a lot of the young people go through. And it is horrible, some of the stories I've heard, and the fact that they've then said to us, that the school gives no kind of support whatsoever. I've some of the youth workers that work there, they were trying to give in training to a couple of schools, I think especially my school. They tried giving training to the teachers there on how to deal with it, and they completely just shoved it off and pushed it away, basically said that they didn't want the training and how to actually help their pupils, you know. So they're completely pushing it away, and I feel that's because they don't feel like they have to. They feel as though that's an option. But I think if schools felt more like it, maybe not like the law, but, you know, enforced policy that certain things had to be done to, like, or else there would be repercussions for the school, for the teachers, you know. But another thing I was going to say was, there's giving mental health talks is great, you know. I think for children who already have existing mental health problems and illnesses, the support for them is great. Like, I started off first year in my school, and I already knew people who struggled with their mental health a load, and I did actually struggle with my mental health going into you know, secondary school, and I was struggling with it actually in primary school. But because I didn't realize myself what was going on, that, you know, I was saying to my teachers every day, oh, I feel really sick, but it was because I was so anxious about the school day, and it was the loneliness, you know. I struggled a lot with that, and I think if there had been more awareness from a primary school age, that I would have realized, teachers even would have realized more what was actually going on with me, rather than thinking I just didn't want to be in school every day. And I think I would have been able to cope and handle things better than coming into secondary school, and I wouldn't have felt as pressured to, because of everybody else having such bad mental health around me. I felt like I was the odd one out, and I felt, oh my goodness, I pressured my own mind into creating problems in my own mind that, you know, that I eventually did actually have, you know, and then being diagnosed with all these things. And it's started from such a young age without even having any sort of awareness about it at all. And I think not just speaking to people my age about it, a couple of years younger than me, bringing it, educating primary school teachers, educating primary school parents from, you know, day one, of how to spot the things of children who are beginning to struggle, like you know, say people whose parents split up at an early age. How does, you know, schools need to be aware of that, even though it is, you know, outside school, because then that will affect young children, especially how they perform in school. And then, you know, early on, if they're not doing well because their parents have split up when they're 5 and they've just started school, they'll be struggling from day one, and they will continue to struggle because people don't realize what they're actually going through.
Very important points there, Mia. Can I pick up on one, and it's also come through in the chat as well, around teachers and educators, how they need to be skilled, they need to be resourced, they need to actually believe that mental health and well-being is part of their role as a teacher. So there's a key question here about how teachers and educators can be supported in that, and the Mind Tribe, Katie and Bernie have both raised this. Anybody want to come back with some ideas on how we can support teachers? And of course, for me, it starts with their own mental health and well-being and their self-awareness of where they are, you know, emotionally when they're coming into this. So Theo, you have your hand up. Yeah.
I've just a really, really quick point. Teachers and school staff should have mental health first aid training. Simple as that. They should have adequate support. And now teachers are kind of expected to do a lot more than their role. They're expected to be counselors, and they're expected to look at, you know, to kind of patch those short-term mental health issues that young people are having. And they need the training to deal with it, because it's too much of a burden to expect teachers and staff to be able to deal with this when they don't have the you know, the training themselves. And it also affects them. So simple as, you know, they need the adequate training. It's good to see that the mental health framework pays tribute to that, but it does need to be solid. The teachers need support. It's simple as.
Yeah, I would agree with you. They need, first of all, they need to understand that this is part of the role of a teacher. So when they're coming into the profession, we're attracting people who are interested in doing this kind of holistic work with young people, or interested and recognise that that must be a part of their role. So really recruiting the right people into this job, I think, is very important as well. In terms of mental health first aid, I think it's more, yes, the training, the recognition when there's signs that something's wrong, what it is, but I think they also need to have that support framework so they know where to go with this stuff. When you can't just give it to teachers, because they're not counsellors. It's a very, very different role. It's a very different role from parenting as well. So they need to have the backup and the support. Kula, you're saying yes here. What's your view?
I absolutely agree. Teachers see children every day, so they can see where things change. And Mia's absolutely right. There are groups of children who don't always talk about the things that worry them. You know, children who are in the care of the state, children who are young carers, all sorts of issues, and teachers have to hold that. But until we have we have smaller class sizes, for example, so it's very hard to be a P2 teacher. There I am, I'm mentioning my friend again. This is the second day in a row I've mentioned my friend. So a friend of mine and Bernie's, P2 teacher, very, very experienced. She has 30 children in the class, and with a very, very able classroom assistant. Now that's not unusual. So they need to have the space and the time. So, you know, the fact that she's not got the time to do that, well, she makes the time because she works all hours, but means that she can't discharge her what she wants to discharge for those children. So one, we need to make sure that they can be sensitive and understand, and, you know, the training and the awareness raising. But two, they need to have the space and the time to be able to mind their young people in the way they want to.
Yeah. I wonder if I could come in here, Siobhan, too. I guess for me, there's two things that in those kind of priorities at the start that the young people had identified that I think this whole discussion really links to. And one is about how you reduce the impact of stress within the education system. Well, as you say, that has to start with teachers and reducing their stress, because that percolates throughout the full system if that isn't dealt with, including the pressure on staff for that academic standards that's often there, and the lack of balance with that around the kind of nurturing around mental health and wellbeing. So there's something there about staff. And I guess the other thing is about the whole school approach and what that actually means as a whole school approach. So I think I would absolutely agree that staff and training and support for staff needs to be mandatory. Whether that's mental health first aid, I think, is a different debate, because I think that now, but what's really interesting is if you start to look at the evidence that's emerging around the effectiveness of a whole school approach. One really interesting study that was done in England around RSA academies, so kind of older young people, so the teachers in all of these academies had to go through training, and essentially the evidence, it didn't really matter what the training was. What was most important was giving space for together to talk about the issues that they deal with day in, day out, and that was more important than whether it was mental health first aid or about signs and symptoms or whatever. But importantly, they can't just have one-off training. It needs to be built into supervision, and it has to be built into the mechanisms for them to be able to adequately support on their own basis. So training's a great start, but that can't be it. It has to be built in on an ongoing basis so that staff can debrief and so that they can support themselves, because peer support also works with teachers. It's not just a young person-led initiative. It also works with staff, some of whom will feel comfortable in that space and others won't, and we need to recognise that. And that's why you need to create these environments where staff can come together to really discuss their own schools, their pupils, and the issues that are relevant for them.
Yep, I wholeheartedly agree with you, Julie. We could talk a wee bit more about that in the context of trauma-informed schools, which has been raised in the Q&A, but I want to talk to Mia. Mia, you've been itching to get in there for a while. Apologies.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that like training needs to happen, not even jump in at, you know, third year in secondary school. Start now from the beginning, start the process now. You know, like we can't expect teachers to be able to deal with it all on their own, because they didn't have that. Like the majority of teachers would be, you know, the older generation. The older generation would have been in school. The way they dealt with things when children acted out, they didn't realise that they were actually maybe going through something. The only way they would react with it was, you know, a cane or hitting them and physically punishing them for acting out, not reading into why they are. And I think, you know, you can't expect people to immediately have that intuition and, you know, oh, they're starting to misbehave, you know, these past couple of months, I've got to start looking into what's wrong with them. No, you can't expect that. You've got to educate the teachers on how to educate the pupils and how to deal with things and how to come to them. And I think that teachers definitely building a relationship with pupils is a key thing, but teachers need to go through training courses from the beginning, from early ages. And as the children then move up in schools, it needs to start being enforced, because you need to start it from the age of, is it 4 or 5, you know, children start primary 1. You need to start it from that age, you know, maybe not as intense, but you need to educate all the teachers the same. So then as the children move up through school, it's not just a big, oh, this is how this is supposed to be. This is a big, massive change. It needs to feel normal for them so that they don't feel pressured, you know, all one day that, wow, everybody else is saying that they've got all these issues. I have these issues now, and actually not even having the issues and then starting to create them in their head, because realistically, you know, up until you're 25, your brain doesn't fully develop, and they're not even realizing that they're creating all these issues in their head. And if they're continued on till they are fully developed in the brain, that will stay in their head. And they, you know, I get myself into anxious states quite a lot, and I know that physically it's something that I can control. I just need to put myself into that place. And I think my school, there was parts of it that they handled quite well, but there was areas that they didn't. But that was because they didn't have the training and they didn't know physically what to do. Because like I had a teacher in my school, and he literally said to us, like, I can't deal with girls crying. And he didn't know how to handle it. And, you know, if there was a problem, I had him for maths and he was my year teacher. If I got upset, maths just wasn't my strong suit. And if I got, you know, frustrated or upset and I started to get upset, he would not know how to deal with it, and he'd have to go and get another teacher. And I think if there was training for him, not even, you know, somebody comes into the school and, you know, says that they're having suicidal thoughts, not even that kind of, you know, deep in far end of the spectrum, more just daily things. And, you know, teachers are taught, you know, you can't lay a hand on people's now. This is how this is supposed to be. It should be enforced just the same way that is. Just as though, you know, with suicide in school, teachers literally in my school would have just sent you home, called your parents and sent you home. There would have been no dealing with it in school with your parents. It would have been, no, this is us, this is our policy, this is what we have to do. No, it's just you go home. You sort that out at your own house. You know, there was no getting involved, because they want to try and keep school and home separate, where there is separate areas, but there needs to be that small blurred area of where things actually do collide with each other, and they need to be dealt with. And teachers need the training for it 100%.
Brilliant, Mia. You've said it so well. I think it's some sort of laughing about the teacher who said that he can't handle care. It is really amusing. It probably says so. You can deconstruct that in a load of different ways. But yeah, you're absolutely right. There is that, you know, blurry boundary, and it's often about their own experiences and their self-awareness and how it impacts on them emotionally and their ability to handle their own emotional life, you know, their own emotional world. Chris, I think you had your hand up there. You wanted to come in there too.
Yeah, just briefly, Siobhan. I think one of the contributors in the chat section summed it up really well, that well-being is the foundation to development and to learning. And I agree with other contributors that teacher well-being has to be at the core of that then, but also parental well-being. Education committee engaged with parenting and I recently, and it really reminded us that key to youth mental health is parental and guardian mental health. So when we're talking about mental health literacy for young people right from the earliest possible age, I was privileged to see the application of Pure Mental's mental health literacy toolkits in action in Braniel Primary School in East Belfast. It really opened my mind to where, and I think Rhonda referred to this in the opening remarks, we kind of presume that some of this work happens anyway, and seeing it in action through the Pure Mental Toolkit and Braniel, and being told that actually without this toolkit, without this intentional focus on mental health literacy from the earliest of ages, it isn't happening. And I suppose I reflect myself that I don't know that parents get a health visitor at the earliest age, and that's about it. There's no parental mental health literacy toolkit provided to all of us. And I think equipping parents, equipping teachers, to help equip young people, I think is going to be key in relation to this. And it's clear that there are tools being developed, whether organizations like Pure Mental, or my understanding is that SIA is developing a wellbeing hub as well, that hopefully will help parents, help parental well-being, teacher well-being, and parent and teacher ability to then respond to and help young people in the way that May is talking about.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. I was distracted there for a second, Chris, by some information that we have a First Minister and Deputy First Minister confirmed. So that's good news.
Back to business.
Yeah, back to business. And I think, and this is relevant as well, we talk about parental mental health and well-being and parents' toolkits and all the rest. Like I'm a lone parent, right? And even getting enough time to bath my child and give her dinner and get her to bed and get my own work done, it's just impossible, and I think there's things we need to look at across society that relate to parents' well-being as well. So childcare is one thing too. The lack of flexibility in many workplaces that that mean that children need to go to childminders for long periods of time, and the cost of that. So there's so many things that are outside of education and outside of health that impact on parents' well-being, including the cost of childcare and working hours and all the rest. So I think those things are really difficult. So we start to recognize that being a parent is a really important role. We need to acknowledge the time that parents need to spend with young people, with their children, mothers in particular. But even you look at parental leave, maternity leave, all of those policies impact on parents' mental health and their ability to co-regulate, which is what they're doing in those first few years of life, and they're teaching young people how to manage their emotions. But you can't do that from a place of dysregulation and stress as a parent. So it's there as well. One of our questions here is really good. Teachers do need support. So the Mind Tribe, Katie Matthews has asked, do we have mental health designated leads in NI in the same way as we have designated safeguarding leads? So that's leads in schools, I think you're speaking about there. I don't think we do. Some schools have workers. Killa, do you want to come in on that?
Not that I'm aware of. We have obviously pastoral care. There's always certainly a vice principal and then a team responsible for pastoral care, and we have, as you've already said, safeguarding. I think we may see something going on when we get the REACH program going into schools, which is youth workers going in and doing mental health supports. And if those workers are embedded in the schools, they may be in a place, and I've seen it happen in some schools already have that model where they have often a youth work qualified person leading on mental health, and also running the nurture room and nurture facilities. So we don't have it as one of those designated roles that I'm aware of, but the REACH program may help that happen.
I think, and we do deviate off the topic of data and research, but it's really important that we collect the data on the difference that these interventions
yes,
make.
absolutely. Absolutely.
100%, and not only just well-being, on educational attainment and all those other outcomes, because we know that dysregulated children cannot learn. It's absolutely impossible to be curious and focused whenever you're coping with the effects of trauma in the home environment or dysregulation. When that fight or flight response is activated, learning is simply not possible. So getting that across and measuring it and showing the difference, and then everybody will want it.
That's the big issue about the education, the emotional health and wellbeing in education framework, and the 20 million and the existing monies is governance of it. And there's still some question marks around how that's going to be run, and how much, what proportion of that is going to be invested in evaluation and in engagement to make sure we're getting it right. And that is critical if we're going to embed it and ensure that it evolves and responds to what's going on for our young people.
And Sinead has just come in, Sinead Welsh from the Informed Minds app. Again, and I wanted to respond to this, only there were so many questions coming in, but the idea that this cannot be a one-off tick box, I would argue that that's actually harmful. If you have someone coming in giving a talk about how important mental health is, but it's not followed up, it can lead to people disclosing things that are then not managed very well and create more anxiety for everybody. But it can be like that sense of, we know this is so important, but let's get back to the harmful work and practices and ignore it for the rest of the time, which is trauma inducing rather than trauma informed. So being trauma informed in a school is about that deep work that really fostering the relationships and supporting each other so that we can recognize the impact of trauma, of stress, of distress, and that we can then start to address it properly and support each other through it. So Leican has come in here, hi, from the Counselling All Nations, I think, group is, and you've asked, I wonder, is there anything the panellists or educators on the call would know about specific additional needs of children and young people from Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities, and how those issues are addressed? And does anybody want to pick up on that one particular?
Do you want me to do some work that we've been doing there, Siobhan? I guess the first thing to say is that across research, we know that people from BME communities are underrepresented, always, pretty much always. So we do have a lack of data on the needs around people from BME communities. However, I guess two things, some of the key barriers that we know around, I guess, creating good mental health is around low levels of mental health literacy and fear of stigma. And specifically within BME communities, those two issues are highlighted. So one is around the cultural connotations of mental health that are specific to different Black and minority ethnic communities, and understanding that. So we've done quite a bit of work specifically around refugee communities, where even basic things like there's no translation of mental health and well-being into Arabic. So it's a different concept altogether. So really understanding that, and also about quite often low help seeking from Asian communities. So there are specific cultural issues. And I think the other thing to recognise is the intersectionality of stigma. And by that, we just mean the other layers of stigma that people may be experiencing, not just in relation to their mental health and wellbeing. And clearly within Black and minority ethnic communities, racism is a big part of that. And we need to recognise and call it for what it is, you know. So I think in relation to mental health and wellbeing, these wider issues, because clearly we're not just one identity, we're a series of identities, aren't we? And one of them may well be our mental health status, but one may also be our ethnicity or whatever else. So recognising that, and I think we've got some way, I think, for any sort of mental health curriculum to really think and to make connections to some of these broader issues. I don't think it does it well enough, not just in Northern Ireland, but across lots of areas, actually.
I think in Northern Ireland, we're very focused on two communities, that we do forget that there are other minority communities out there as well who suffer a lot of discrimination, maybe more so than other areas. I think there's some data on that as well. So we need to be collecting quantitative, but also qualitative data on the experiences of young people, because we can't assume that even in the questions that we ask, those are the right questions that we're asking. You know, I think that that's so important as well. So the need, again, to engage with young people. And a lot of the migrant groups that I've spoken to, you know, we're talking about children who've suffered significant, severe trauma. and separation and all sorts of horrendous things. So that's definitely a group, and there's some really good work happening with looked after children in Northern Ireland, but it's certainly not universal. Culla, you're nodding. Do you want to come in on that group, on that issue as well?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more, and particularly because here in Northern Ireland, all those services for children from Black and minority ethnic communities are underdeveloped, and they're nowhere near where they would have been, where you know, they're nowhere near where they are across the water or even across the border. When the Vulnerable Syrian Family Scheme was operating, every school that had one of the children on that scheme received additional money to be able to support those children with whatever issues. But it does, as you were talking, it does strike me, particularly when we're talking about the primary school, we're talking about rolling out primary school counselling, which is more likely to take a more family support role, as you know, not just working with individual children. There's work to be done about how that will work. And it does strike me that needs to develop appropriately, culturally and language wise, to be able to reach those families, particularly traumatized families, who have been fleeing goodness knows what, and have come to Northern Ireland for sanctuary. That there's work to be done, and we need to, it does, as you were talking there, Julie, just struck me that those questions will and Siobhan, we can have that conversation later. Those questions will have to be asked about how culturally sensitive and how aware those services will be to these families and the children. And the other thing is Irish language medium schools. They are playing catch up on the ability to access what other schools take for granted, because they're not always available in the Irish language, and it's very difficult for children, particularly in school, to have to switch between the languages. So that's another on the day that is in it today. That's another issue that we need to take to consider very seriously.
That's a really good point, but we'll add it to our agenda for our next meeting, Culla, for the next Mental Health Champions meeting with you. And so there's one question here on digital mental health interventions from an anonymous attendee. Pure Mental, are they going to curate and grow them? I know digital mental health is included in the mental health strategy, and I think it's really important that it's in there. The first version was around how it's not going to replace face-to-face contact, but there's so much we can do digitally to support young people at it, on that instant access to support and help through the Text and Nurse program. As an example, the Text and Nurse scheme seems to be very, very much welcome. So we're communicating with young people using the methods that they use rather than telling them the phone helplines. I don't even like making a phone call right now. So I think digital mental health is really the future. And there's so much that we should be doing there. But are the Education Authority planning on doing, I guess that they've rolled out the Text and Nurse scheme. Are they doing more? I'm not sure. Chris, do you know about this, Culla, digital mental health?
No, it would
young people.
I need to follow it up, but all I would say is obviously one of the key recommendations of the Elephant in the Room campaign was for a youth mental health website to centralise information and also to provide a 24/7 online chat support facility and safe online space. So I think given the amount of time that we all, and particularly young people, spend online, that has to be given real serious consideration and resource. And I think I know we can all be subject to online bullying and abuse, but and as Rhonda said earlier, some real positive aspects of social media and digital media, but some of the negativity is so intense. And I think in Northern Ireland, the default setting is to not let anybody get above their station, or to give them friendly banter, as it will be referred to at times. And it's actually taboo to speak really positively and encouragingly towards one another. I think we need to try our best to flip that on its head, to make it default to be okay to tell each other, and for young people to tell each other positive things, to encourage each other, to be cultural leaders and step in and speak out against negativity towards others. and to make it taboo to not do that. But we've got a lot of work to do in that regard. But yeah, I think that the online space for support and leadership is really important, and it's definitely something that we need to take up. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we should all. I teach my 4-year-old to use her nice voice and ask for things nicely, and to try and make other people feel happy and stuff. And they really reinforce it at that age group. But then something happens whenever people get on Twitter, for example, and it's terrible the way people speak to each other. So yeah, really, really important points there about
really briefly, Siobhan. Sorry, I know loneliness had been mentioned earlier. Scotland has a connected Scotland strategy, I think it's called, to tackle loneliness, and one of the key aims of it is that everybody would be treated with kindness, and it can sound like a really soft aim, but it struck me that if you applied that to every policy or every interaction that you had, it would actually go a heck of a long way to improving things. And there is an all-party group on loneliness at the Assembly as well that could maybe be interacting with the issue of youth loneliness as well a bit better then.
Yeah, it's like when we used to be able to travel, you would go to other countries and like particularly the US, where everybody's very polite, and it was a really strange thing, we don't want to fake it. We want this to be authentic, but we should be really trying to be more kind to each other. Julia's come in here with, do you want to say it in person, Julie, and then we'll go to you, Rhonda?
Yeah, I guess I was just in the chat. Do you mean some of the stuff I put in the chat? It's just about digital innovation, certainly. One of the things that we are doing in Scotland, so in fact next week we're launching a new school-based resource that's available for all staff, everyone that works within a school, which is equivalent of about 6 hours of online engagement time around mental health and wellbeing, and it's been seen as a kind of basic platform to start everyone off from. So it includes all staff and others that engage within schools. So parents, it's a free open access, so parents can also access it. And it gives people a basic introduction to mental health and wellbeing and some of the core principles of prevention, but also some of those core skills that we think that all staff and others who work with young people are in the lives of young people. So I do think there's a real role. It's not the answer only, because we know there is an issue with digital exclusion and others, but I think it can play a real hand-in-hand role with ongoing face-to-face support, particularly around supporting staff and parents, where you're going to struggle for people to meet in person just due to other commitments,
Yeah, there's a lot of information sharing can be done digitally, and training can be done digitally in a much more efficient and cost-effective way. It's no substitute for all the relational stuff that we do in experiential work, but there's things you can do really cheaply and quickly digitally that you can, which
should enhance the face-to-face work, So it's not to take that away about recognising how important it is, like staff supervision and things is really important face-to-face, but I think there are things you can do to kind of marry. I think it's only a certain generation that now see digital worlds and offline worlds as separate. All young people don't view it like that. It's part of their world, and it's so connected that it's this. I guess it's kind of probably my generation that see online being very, very separate from offline. But on the whole, younger people don't make that distinction. So we probably need to move in that direction.
Yeah, it's just their life, it's their world, it's on their phone, It's all around them. That's what it is. But then you mentioned digital exclusion and digital poverty as well are significant issues in Northern Ireland. I mean, I'm doing all this from 4G Wi-Fi here that could crash at any minute, so and lots of young people don't have access to devices, and all of these things are important issues. Rhonda, you wanted to come in there, sorry.
Yeah, no, you're all right. And normally I don't get involved in these discussions because I like to listen and to learn, but I just wanted to go back to something that Chris had said about social media. So we need to be aware that where social media is concerned, it's different from digital interventions. We need to make sure there's a split between that, because social media is facilitated through third-person platforms and entities, specific machine learning algorithms designed to ensure we engage so the tech companies are making money. And this is where a lot of the negative impact of social media comes from. It's those clickbaits and the persuasive technologies and things like that. So that's something maybe we need to be working with the big tech companies to see what we can do to help encourage our young people not to get them sort of caught up in that. Theo, as well, you had mentioned about research. Now, this is something I've learned over probably the past 5 or 10 years, is a lot of researchers are very scared to go and talk to young people who are under 18 because of the ethical concerns. So we need to help researchers break down those barriers and teach them that it's really, really worthwhile to do that research, and getting it through the ethics is actually a really good thing because it lets us tap into that resource. But there is a fear among researchers when you're working with young people under 18. And another thing, Kula, you had mentioned about a group that's going in to do to deliver mental health interventions in the schools. One quote came to mind from one of the young people that I was talking to, and I'll paraphrase it because I don't have it right in front of me, but it was like, don't you be sending no 40-year-old man into my school. It's an all-girls school. We need people we can relate to. So
these are youth workers.
Yeah, but it's also quite important that we're aware of the connection between those who are delivering and those who are actually receiving it, to make sure that it's the right balance and the right match. So that's me done. I'm going to shut up now.
Chris is a 40, well, God knows how old Chris is. You know, it is about, having the space.
I am, you're right.
Can I just say something about researching with under 18s? It is quite, and as Children's Commissioner, I've had to go out and about and talk with obviously, I've had to. The joy of the job is talking with children and young people, particularly the wee ones. It is the most joyous, scary, but most joyous thing you ever do. And take your time with your ethics. Do what you need to do, because you flow out of those engagements. You feel a burden, you feel a privilege, because sometimes they tell you things you don't want to know, but you feel like you've achieved something, and you float. So it's well worth doing the ethics, and it's right. You should jump through those hoops because they're very, very precious, but it's so worth it, so worth it.
And I think if there's anything to be gained from, setting up a research centre for mental health as part of the mental health strategy, making sure there are structures in place so that young people can participate in research and shape the research priorities, that's something that kind of research centre needs to be promoting and facilitate. And rather than funding research, which everybody knows I'm not in favour of big research funds, coming from government, from away from money for mental health or anything else. There's other structures that are there to provide research funding, but certainly to build capacity, then that's something that we should be doing. So we've gone a wee bit over time. Does anybody have anything pressing to say before we end it?
Just one other pitch, Siobhan. I think physical activity was mentioned earlier as well, and some of the data around the amount of hours of physical education that young people get in school per week are really concerning, really starting really low. And I know we've got some fantastic PE teachers throughout our schools, but I think there's a real concern as to how well that's timetabled, how well that's resourced, how creative it is to meet the different interests and needs of different types of pupils. And it's an issue that the Education Committee are looking at, and I think it's one that's really, really important. I think physical well-being is clearly connected to mental well-being as well, and something to look at. And one other last thing I think that's been touched on throughout the conversations is just the policy and provision in education. There are a number of issues in education that have been referred to as systemic inequality. We know that a lot of our schools are over capacity and under resourced, and obviously there's an independent review of education coming up, but we can have all the mental health literacy in the world and the right interventions at the right ages and stages. We need our education system to be well structured, with equal opportunity at its heart for every young person, if we're going to ensure that well-being is delivered for all.
Very good points, Chris. And just there to end as well, I think we need to be looking at the impact of selection, of transfer tests, of exams, of cancelling exams. We need to be collecting data and the impact on those in terms of stress, and then mental health and well-being too. And the other thing that, I mean, we recognise physical activity and sport, and there's a lot of talk about that, but music, art, drama, all of those things are regulating. They're really, really important for young people's emotional well-being and mental health. So we need to make sure that we don't lose track of the importance of all of those as subjects in the curriculum, and even right beyond, you know, in our universities. Those are things we need to support young people in doing, because it's important for their mental health. It's important for everybody's mental health, that we have those endeavours promoted and supported. So I will leave it there. Thank you so much for all your contributions. It's been really, really interesting discussion. I'll certainly be looking at that review and the panel and flying the flag for mental health as core in the terms of reference for the review of education. It's in there anyway, but I'd be very interested in seeing how they're going to look at this and what data they're going to collect and look at there too. So that's a really important point as well. Thank you everybody, and good luck. And
Thanks
we'll
all.
be
Lovely to meet you all. Take care.
Bye.